He walked in, soaked from the rain, asking for a room, but the luxury hotel manager took one look at his worn hoodie and kicked him out. The man didn't argue. He just smiled and walked away. The next morning, everything began to change. Who was he, and why did he return in secret? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The rain had come out of nowhere. A quiet drizzle at first, then a full downpour, soaking the streets of downtown Los Angeles in a matter of minutes. Traffic lights glowed through sheets of water, and pedestrians rushed to shelter under bus stops and awnings, clutching coats and briefcases like shields. Cars hissed past on the glossy asphalt, their tires slicing through puddles that reflected the towering buildings above. Keanu Reeves stepped out of the community center just past 9:00 p.m., his hoodie pulled up against the cold and wet. His jeans were already damp at the cuffs. He'd spent the last 6 hours volunteering with underprivileged teens, teaching them basic photography and helping edit their short films for an upcoming showcase. His backpack carried nothing but a pair of worn sneakers, a book of poetry, and a half-empty water bottle. He hadn't planned to stay in the city overnight, but the rain had canceled his ride. Tired and soaked, he needed a place to rest, just for the night. Across the street stood the Sterling Palace Hotel, a towering display of wealth and exclusivity. Gold trim shimmered on its windows even through the rain. Chandeliers glowed warmly from within, casting soft light across the grand marble lobby visible through the floor-to-ceiling glass entrance. Keanu hesitated at the corner, studying the hotel quietly. Then, with his usual calm, he crossed the street and stepped through the large revolving door. Warmth and light enveloped him instantly. The lobby was hushed and immaculate. Marble floors reflected every glint of the gold decor. A grand staircase curved upward like a wave carved from ivory. Music played softly in the background, string instruments elegant and slow. Hotel staff moved with crisp precision, their uniforms sharp, their smiles rehearsed. Behind the glossy black front desk stood Gregory Langston, the hotel's general manager. Tall, sharply dressed in a tailored navy suit, Gregory was flipping through a leather-bound reservation ledger with the air of a man guarding a treasure vault. He didn't notice Keanu at first, not until the soft sound of wet sneakers squishing against marble made him glance up. Gregory's expression shifted in an instant. His eyes swept over Keanu's hoodie, his water-streaked jeans, the faint trace of mud on the hem, and the soaked backpack hanging off one shoulder. "Can I help you, sir?" Gregory asked, his tone stiff. Keanu stepped forward, brushing a few drops of rain from his jacket. His voice was low, steady, almost apologetic. "Good evening, I'd like to book a room for the night if you have one available." Gregory blinked, then slowly closed the reservation book. He forced a polite smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm afraid we have a strict dress code here at the Sterling Palace," he said, drawing out each word like a lesson. "And tonight, we are fully booked." Keanu glanced at the nearly empty lobby. Only 2 other guests sat near the fireplace. The air was still, unhurried. He looked back at Gregory, no irritation on his face, no argument forming on his lips. Just a calm pause. "I understand," Keanu said quietly. Gregory gave a small nod and turned back to his computer screen, acting as though the conversation was over. But Keanu didn't move right away. He looked around the lavish lobby with a quiet kind of observation. Not envy, not awe, just reflection. His gaze wandered to the grand chandelier above, to the ornate trim lining the staircase, and finally to the side window facing the street. There, taped to the inside of the glass, was a small handwritten sign. It was almost hidden behind a floral arrangement, black ink on plain white paper. "Kitchen staff wanted, inquire within." Keanu stared at it for a few seconds. Something about the sign seemed to reach into him, stirring something deeper than the cold on his skin. His lips curled into the faintest smile. "Thank you for your time," he said at last. Gregory barely looked up. "Of course. Have a pleasant evening, sir." As Keanu turned and began walking toward the door, his soaked sneakers left faint marks across the pristine floor. From behind the front desk, a young concierge named Mia Thompson had been watching everything. She was only 23, still working part-time while attending college. Dressed in the standard hotel uniform, her hair pulled into a neat ponytail, she had been organizing guest folders when she heard Keanu's voice. Her breath caught the moment she saw him. She recognized him immediately, not from his clothes or the way he carried himself, but from his face, one she'd seen 100 times in movies, interviews, and newspaper articles. This was Keanu Reeves. The Keanu Reeves. One of the most respected actors in the world, known not just for his films, but for his humility. For giving away money, riding the subway, walking unnoticed among crowds, and choosing kindness even when no one was looking. She stared at him, heart pounding, silently pleading for Gregory to realize who he had just turned away. But Gregory hadn't noticed. Or worse, he had, and didn't care. Mia opened her mouth, then closed it again. She should say something, tell her boss he was making a mistake, but fear held her back. She needed this job, her tuition deadline was coming up, and Gregory had a reputation. Cold, controlling, unforgiving. So she watched. Watched as Keanu paused for a moment at the exit, glanced one last time at the "Help Wanted" sign, then turned back toward the door. As he stepped into the rain again, the cold rushed in behind him. The glass doors shut with a soft hiss. Outside, the storm hadn't let up. Water splashed at his feet as he crossed the pavement. His hood was still up, and the headlights of passing cars flashed against the wet fabric. He never looked back. Mia did. She followed his figure through the glass, feeling a twist in her chest. She had seen something in his eyes as he left. Not anger, not humiliation, but something quieter. It looked like understanding. Mia stood frozen behind the desk, gripping a folder she'd stopped organizing minutes ago. Her eyes stayed on Keanu's retreating figure until he crossed the street and disappeared into the shadows beyond a row of trees. The downpour blurred the view, turning the outside world into streaks of silver and shadow. But she could still make out the shape of him walking alone, not in a rush, not defeated, just quiet. Behind her, Gregory huffed and returned to his paperwork. "Some people," he muttered, shaking his head, "think they can just walk in here dressed like that and expect service?" Mia didn't answer. Her gaze dropped to the small "Help Wanted" sign still taped in the window. She remembered putting it up last week. The hotel's kitchen had lost 2 workers, and Mrs. Callahan, the head chef, had been begging for replacements. Gregory had refused to pay for a recruiting agency, insisting someone would wander in eventually. Someone had. Mia thought of Keanu again, the rain dripping from his sleeves, his voice so soft, almost hesitant, like he was trying not to be a burden, and then the way he looked at that sign, like it meant more than just a job posting. Her heart twisted. She glanced over at Gregory, who had already returned to scrolling through spreadsheets. His mind was elsewhere, completely unaware of the moment that had just passed him by. Mia wanted to speak, to say, "That man is worth more than this entire lobby," but she didn't. Instead, she turned her eyes back to the window and whispered to herself, "I hope he comes back." As the night wore on, the rain fell harder. Thunder rolled faintly in the distance, echoing through the streets of the city. But inside the hotel, all was quiet, pristine, untouched. The kind of place that didn't welcome anyone who didn't already look like they belonged. Upstairs, guests dined in the gold-plated restaurant, their conversations filled with wine pairings and business deals. On the ground floor, the marble shone under chandeliers. But near the window, taped by a thumbtack and a piece of transparent tape, the sign remained. Kitchen staff wanted, inquire within. And outside, somewhere in the rain, Keanu Reeves walked alone into the night, carrying nothing but a soaked backpack, a tired heart, and the memory of being turned away without a second glance. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't named who he was. He hadn't asked for anything more than a room. But something in his silence felt like a storm yet to come. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled like wet asphalt and freshly rinsed concrete. Mia arrived at the hotel just before sunrise, her umbrella dripping as she stepped through the gleaming glass doors of the Sterling Palace. She hadn't slept much. All night she kept replaying the moment from the evening before. The way Keanu Reeves had stood in the lobby, quiet and respectful, only to be turned away like he was nothing. It didn't sit right with her. She clocked in as usual and made her way toward the back office, but something stopped her. A loud beeping sound echoed from the rear service corridor. She turned and followed the noise, heels clicking softly on the tile. As she reached the back entrance, her eyes widened. 3 delivery trucks were backed into the service lot, their cargo doors wide open. Workers in dark blue uniforms wheeled massive boxes into the hotel's staff entrance. Shrink-wrapped crates, dolly carts, and polished steel appliances that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "Lion water in the world," Mia whispered. She pushed through the swinging doors and found herself staring into a completely transformed kitchen. The old, scratched stovetops and dated ovens were gone. In their place were brand new commercial-grade units, sleek gas ranges, double-deck convection ovens, stainless steel prep tables, a walk-in fridge door so polished she could see her reflection. Mrs. Callahan stood in the center of the kitchen, her apron hanging loose around her waist, a look of shock frozen on her face. "Who ordered all this?" Mia asked softly, stepping up beside her. Mrs. Callahan blinked. I don't know." She pointed to a clipboard resting on a new countertop. Mia picked it up and scanned the receipt. Paid in full. Starlight Foundation. Community Grant Division. "What's the Starlight Foundation?" Mia asked. Mrs. Callahan shook her head. "Never heard of it. They must have called during the night. I just showed up to this circus." More workers arrived, wheeling in a new commercial dishwasher, vent hoods, and sets of polished chef's knives in wooden cases. Another group rolled in a gleaming refrigerator compressor unit. One technician smiled and nodded at Mia. "Top-of-the-line equipment," he said. "Someone really wants you folks to cook like royalty." Mia nodded slowly, her thoughts racing. Gregory hadn't mentioned any upgrades, and he wasn't one to spend a dime unless it improved the bottom line. But this wasn't just an upgrade. It was a total transformation. She opened a second invoice folder from one of the workers. $30,000, all mark paid. Her eyes drifted toward the loading dock, where more crates were being wheeled in under the morning sun. Who did this? And why now? By the time Gregory arrived, the kitchen looked like it had been plucked from the pages of a luxury restaurant magazine. His expensive shoes tapped loudly on the tile as he entered, eyebrows already furrowed. "What's going on in here?" he asked, taking in the chaos of equipment, installers, and curious kitchen staff crowding the space. Mrs. Callahan, still visibly stunned, gestured toward the new gas range. "Brand new Vulcan stoves, high-capacity convection ovens, a walk-in cooler with temperature controls. It's everything I asked for last year, and more." Gregory turned toward Mia. "Did you authorize any of this?" Mia hesitated. "No, sir, but it's all legit. The invoices are clear. It's a donation from something called the Starlight Foundation. Paid in full. Multiple vendors confirmed it." Gregory grabbed the clipboard and squinted at the paperwork. "Starlight Foundation," he muttered. "Never heard of them." He flipped the pages rapidly, his expression hard to read, part confusion, part reluctant appreciation. "Well, if it's free, he finally said, trying to sound casual. "Can't complain about that." Mia caught the flicker of discomfort in his eyes. Gregory didn't like being out of the loop. especially when it made him look uninformed in front of the staff. But the kitchen crew was too distracted by the gleaming new workspace to notice. Laughter and astonishment echoed off the stainless steel walls. "I thought we were going to have to shut down the restaurant for health code violations next month," said one of the line cooks. "Now it looks like we could host a celebrity chef here." Mrs. Callahan nodded, still dazed. "Whoever did this, they didn't just send us tools. They gave us a chance to keep going." Mia felt something shift in her chest. A quiet thought had started to whisper inside her the moment she saw the trucks. Now it grew louder. What if it wasn't just a donation? What if it was a message? She stepped away from the crowd and peeked back toward the hotel's front entrance, where the same "Help Wanted" sign still hung in the window. She remembered Keanu standing there the night before, drenched in rain, silent, gentle, looking at that sign like it meant something. Could it really be him? Would someone like Keanu Reeves do something like this, without ever saying a word? At exactly 2 o'clock that afternoon, a second wave of deliveries began arriving, this time through the front entrance. Uniformed staff rushed to assist the drivers as boxes upon boxes were wheeled in on carts lined with padded velvet. The guests lounging in the lobby turned to stare as crates of produce, fine oils, imported goods, and sealed packages of specialty meats were rolled past them into the kitchen. Mia watched as the boxes were unloaded and opened one by one. Her breath caught at the sight. Truffle oil, organic saffron, cuts of Wagyu beef labeled from Kobe, Japan, Himalayan salt blocks, blocks of Parmigiano Reggiano still in their original wax seals, whole Atlantic salmon on ice, handmade pastas in wooden trays, fresh thyme, rosemary and lavender bundled in delicate cloth. Everything meticulously packed and clearly expensive. Even Mrs. Callahan, usually composed and commanding, sat down on a prep stool and simply stared. This is enough to run a 5-star menu for 6 months, she whispered. Gregory hovered nearby, examining the labels. "Paid for in advance," one of the delivery men said. "Weekly shipments scheduled through summer." Gregory turned sharply. "By who?" The delivery man checked the invoice and held it out. "Same name as this morning, Starlight Foundation." Mia stepped closer and looked at the document. The letterhead was elegant, printed in deep navy with a golden arc design. There was no phone number, no website, just a P.O. box and a nondescript email. Gregory frowned. "This is getting weird." "Weird?" Mrs. Callahan looked up, incredulous. "We've been begging for decent ingredients for over a year. Last month we couldn't afford to serve fresh basil. Now I'm holding white truffle mushrooms." "I'm not complaining," Gregory said quickly. "But people don't just spend this kind of money on strangers. Not unless they want something." Mia said nothing. She was already miles ahead in her thoughts, flipping through each moment from the night before. Keanu. The rain. His eyes on the sign. The way he'd said, "I understand," like it meant more than it sounded. And then he left. No argument, no name drop, just grace and silence. Her heart raced as the pieces connected. She walked quietly into the service corridor and found the clipboard still resting on the metal table. The receipts totaled over $40,000, $25,000 for the equipment, $15,000 for ingredients. All signed by the Starlight Foundation, all processed within 12 hours of Keanu being turned away. She didn't need more proof. She knew. It wasn't a guess anymore. It was instinct. Certainty. Keanu had done this, but he didn't want anyone to know. He hadn't come back seeking revenge or recognition. He had simply seen a need and filled it. Mia stared down at the papers in her hand. There was no mention of him. No signature, no initials, just silence and a golden star stamped at the bottom corner of each invoice. An emblem of something bigger, something careful, something kind. She tucked the papers back into the folder and closed it gently. Back in the kitchen, Mrs. Callahan was already organizing the pantry, giving directions to the staff as if she'd been given a second life. Gregory was on the phone with the hotel's accountant, trying to make sense of the mysterious windfall. But Mia just stood still, looking out the back window, where the rain-soaked pavement was now dry and glowing under the afternoon light. The ripples had started, and something told her they were just beginning. By mid-afternoon, the hotel buzzed with quiet energy. Staff moved differently now, sharper, quicker, with the kind of urgency that came from something hopeful just beneath the surface. Even Gregory, who normally micromanaged everything, seemed unusually subdued. He walked through the kitchen once more, eyes darting around the gleaming new appliances, as if trying to find a flaw, something out of place, but there was none. Everything was pristine, efficient, and already being used. Mia was sorting guest keys at the front desk when the glass doors opened again. In walked a woman with short gray hair, a clipboard tucked under one arm, and a stethoscope around her neck. Her black coat was flecked with raindrops, and she walked with confidence, scanning the room like she already knew who she was looking for. "Excuse me," she said, approaching the desk. "I'm looking for Walter Green." Mia blinked. "Walter? The bellhop?" "Yes," the woman nodded. "Someone made an appointment for him and covered the cost in full. Knee consultation, x-rays, physical therapy, everything. I'm Dr. Ingrid Latham from the City Wellness Clinic. They told me to come here personally." Mia's hands paused mid-sort. "Who told you?" The doctor flipped her clipboard around. "The Starlight Foundation. Said he's worked here for decades and recently began having difficulty walking." Before Mia could reply, Walter appeared around the corner, pushing a luggage cart. At 72, he moved slowly, his steps careful and deliberate. He wore the same deep red uniform he had worn for over 20 years. It still fit, though a little looser now, and the gold buttons shone under the lobby lights. The limp in his left leg was subtle but steady. Dr. Latham smiled when she saw him. "Mr. Green?" Walter gave a polite nod, confused. "Yes, ma'am? I'm here to see about that knee of yours. Someone sent me." Walter blinked. I'm sorry?" Mia stepped from behind the desk. "Walter, she's from a clinic. Someone paid for you to be examined. They want you to get treatment. Real treatment." Walter looked between them both, his mouth slightly open. His hand dropped from the luggage cart, trembling just slightly. "But I never told anyone." Dr. Latham approached gently. "Someone noticed, and they cared enough to make sure you got help." Walter's lips quivered. I've just been dealing with it. Didn't want to make a fuss." "You don't have to suffer in silence anymore," Dr. Latham said kindly. "Would you come with me? We'll get a full scan and a treatment plan. Everything is already handled." Walter looked down at his leg, then at Mia, then back at the doctor. Slowly, he nodded, almost disbelieving. "I don't understand," he whispered. "Who would do this for someone like me?" Mia swallowed the lump in her throat. "I think someone who sees more than most," she said softly. Walter disappeared through the lobby doors beside Dr. Latham, walking carefully, but with a strange lightness in his step, as though something heavier than the limp had just been lifted. Mia stood watching until they vanished down the street, then returned to the front desk with her mind racing. The Starlight Foundation again? First the kitchen, then the food, now Walter's health. And none of it asked for, none of it explained. She tried to focus, returning to her paperwork, but her hand paused above a spreadsheet, pencil hovering. She looked toward the lobby window again. The help wanted sign was still there. Its edges had begun curling slightly from moisture in the air. She thought back to how he had looked at it. Not like someone just glancing at an ad, but like someone who knew what it meant to hope for a door to open. She remembered the kindness in his expression when Gregory dismissed him, the grace with which he walked away. It wasn't weakness, it was intention. Like he'd been searching for something. Not a room, but maybe a reason. Later that day, she passed Mrs. Callahan in the kitchen. The head chef was humming, organizing the new spice racks with a sparkle in her eyes Mia hadn't seen in months. "This is the first time I've wanted to stay past my shift in years," Mrs. Callahan said, smiling. "I can finally cook the way I've always dreamed of. Someone gave us a gift we didn't know how to ask for." Mia nodded. A gift. But not just any gift. A precise, personal one. The kind only someone observant and intentional would give. At 5:30, Gregory called an impromptu meeting in the staff lounge. He tried to maintain his usual tone, but even he couldn't hide his uncertainty. "We still don't know who's behind these donations," he admitted, arms crossed. "But whoever it is, they've done more for this hotel in 2 days than our corporate partners have done in 2 years." There was quiet agreement among the staff. Walter's name came up quickly. "Someone's watching out for us," said Maria, a housekeeper who had worked at the hotel for 10 years. "And not for credit, not for press, just because they care." Mia listened silently, her suspicions tightening into a quiet certainty. This wasn't random. This wasn't corporate. This wasn't about money. It was about seeing, and someone had seen them when no one else did. Someone they had almost turned away without a second glance. Someone in a soaked hoodie, eyes full of rain, and something more. That evening, after her shift ended, Mia didn't go straight home. Instead, she stayed behind under the guise of organizing the guest welcome kits, but her real reason was a growing tug in her chest. Something told her that tonight wouldn't be like other nights. Not after everything that had happened. The hotel grew quieter after 9. Most guests were either dining upstairs or already in their rooms. The lobby lights dimmed slightly, giving the crystal chandeliers a softer glow. Mia sat near the front desk, glancing occasionally toward the large lobby windows, waiting for... She wasn't sure what. The rain had started again, not hard this time, but steady enough to paint the glass in thin sheets of moving silver. She watched it fall, hypnotic and constant, the street outside glowing amber under the streetlights. Then she saw him, a silhouette across the road, beneath the same tree that stood near the edge of the sidewalk. The man wasn't moving. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets, looking directly at the hotel. His face was shadowed by the branches, but the stillness of his posture, the shape of his frame, the way he tilted his head slightly, it was all too familiar. Her breath caught. She leaned closer to the glass, her fingers pressing lightly against the cool surface. It had to be him. She remembered that look, curious, calm, watchful, not seeking attention, just present. The man didn't come any closer. He didn't wave. He didn't move from the shadows. He simply stood there, watching. Not the hotel itself, but the people inside. The place he'd once been turned away from. And then, just as quietly as he had come, he turned and walked away, back into the mist, disappearing into the soft curtain of rain, like a memory vanishing before it could be fully grasped. Mia stood at the window long after he was gone. Her reflection stared back at her, young, uncertain, and changed. She didn't need proof. She didn't need a signature or a photo or a confirmation email. She knew. The man who had been turned away in silence had returned with a different kind of voice. A voice that gave without asking, that saw without judging, that helped without needing to be seen. As she reached up to gently adjust the help wanted sign, her fingertips brushed the glass, still cool from the outside storm. Somewhere out there, he was still walking. And somehow, she felt certain, he was far from finished. The sun returned the next morning, as if it had been waiting for the right time to show its face again. The sidewalks still glistened from the night's rain, but the sky above was bright and clear, stretching wide over the city like a clean slate. Mia arrived at the hotel early. She had barely slept. The memory of the man under the tree lingered in her thoughts like an unanswered question. She hadn't told anyone what she saw, not yet. Something about it felt too sacred, too delicate to explain. But the feeling that something bigger was unfolding hadn't left her since. She was setting up the morning coffee station in the lobby when Mr. Pete, the doorman, leaned through the front doors and called softly, "Mia, come here a second." She stepped outside and followed his gesture toward the tiny flower shop across the street. The shop had always looked like it belonged in another time. Faded signage, peeling paint, pots stacked unevenly near the window. Mrs. Delgado, the owner, was in her late 70s and had run the shop alone for nearly 40 years. Business had slowed. She'd spoken often about having to close. But now, something had changed. Two young workers in matching polo shirts were helping Mrs. Delgado unload brand new flower stands and ceramic pots from the back of a white van. Fresh paint cans sat nearby, along with a wooden sandwich board displaying a chalk-written message, "Grand Reopening," sponsored by the Starlight Foundation. Mia's heart skipped. Not again, she thought. She crossed the street and gently touched Mrs. Delgado's shoulder. "What happened?" Mrs. Delgado smiled wide. "I came to open this morning and found the van already here. Paid painters, paid suppliers, a grant envelope with more money than I've seen in years. All from this group I've never heard of. Starlight something?" "The Starlight Foundation," Mia asked, already knowing the answer. Mrs. Delgado nodded. "Yes, that's the one. No one to thank, though, no one to talk to. Just a short letter and a list of everything they'd arranged. Said the neighborhood deserved flowers, can you believe that? Someone thinks our little shop is worth saving." Mia didn't know what to say. Her eyes stung, but she smiled. She looked up at the sign, freshly painted and blooming with color. Someone was doing this. Silently, thoughtfully, not just for the hotel anymore. For the people outside its walls, too. For the whole street. And maybe, just maybe, for something more. By mid-morning, the whispers had spread like sunlight. Mia hadn't even made it back across the street when she heard the next bit of news. A father and son passed by the hotel window, deep in conversation, and she caught one line as they walked by. "The Blay paid everything, man. The back rent, the utilities, we get to stay." She rushed out and caught up with them. "Excuse me," she said gently, "did you say someone helped with your rent?" The man looked at her, surprised but not unkind. His name was Theo James, a single father who worked late-night security at the train station. He lived 2 blocks away with his son, Eli. Everyone in the neighborhood knew them. Quiet, kind, struggling. "I got a call this morning from my landlord," Theo said. "Said my account was settled through April, utilities too. Said a foundation stepped in after getting an anonymous referral." Mia's pulse ticked faster. "Was it the Starlight Foundation?" Theo's eyes widened. "Yeah, that's the name. Who are they?" Mia shook her head. "I'm still trying to figure that out." Back at the hotel, she grabbed a notepad from the front desk drawer and started writing. A list. Not just to keep track, but to understand. It wasn't just kindness happening anymore. It was a pattern. She wrote, 1. Hotel kitchen renovation. 2. 6 months of premium ingredients. 3. Walter's medical expenses. 4. Mrs. Delgado's flower shop. Saved. 5. Theo and Eli's rent paid. Then she flipped the page and started a new one, this time with space to record dates, addresses, notes, anything she could gather. She didn't know what she was building yet, but it felt important. At lunch, she walked 2 blocks to Lincoln Elementary School, where she had once volunteered as part of a summer tutoring program. The building had always felt too small, too tired. Supplies were short. Windows stuck shut. Art classes had been canceled last fall due to budget cuts. Now the principal stood out front, smiling in disbelief as 3 young technicians wheeled in boxes labeled with the name of a popular tech company. Laptops, tablets, touchscreen monitors. Inside, teachers unpacked sets of new art supplies, including watercolors, sketch pads, and boxes of crayons with colors Mia hadn't seen since she was a child. The school nurse waved excitedly as new first aid kits were delivered, along with 3 ergonomic chairs for her tiny office. The principal told Mia it was all courtesy of a private community grant. He showed her the letter. Starlight Foundation, same navy letterhead, same golden arc, same quiet generosity. Mia added it to her list. She stared at the growing web of good that seemed to be spinning out from a single moment. From one rainy night, from one man, Keanu Reeves had disappeared into the rain. But somehow, his presence was everywhere. By late afternoon, Mia's list had grown to nearly a dozen entries. The pattern was undeniable. Small, struggling places, overlooked people, gentle interventions that solved real problems without fanfare. Every act signed, quietly, invisibly, by the same mystery, the Starlight Foundation. At 3:45 p.m., she returned to the hotel lobby, just in time to see a delivery driver handing a brown envelope to Gregory. "Another one?" Gregory asked, clearly flustered but curious. "Yes, sir," the driver said. "It's for the Sterling Palace hospitality team. Came with a message from the sender. They said to keep serving, keep seeing." Gregory opened the envelope carefully. Inside were 10 crisp gift cards to a local grocery chain, each worth $250, 0 cents, enough to cover weeks of food for some of the hotel's housekeeping and kitchen staff. No request for press, no name, just the same gold-stamped seal and printed line at the bottom. "From the community, for the community, Starlight Foundation." Gregory blinked. What kind of operation is this? But Mia already knew. It wasn't an operation. It was a message. That evening, as twilight settled across the city, Mia sat near the lobby window again, watching. The streets were calmer now. A soft breeze moved through the trees. The last traces of yesterday's storm were gone. Yet the after effects remained. Not just in new equipment or paid bills, but in people. Mrs. Delgado had reopened her shop. Theo and Eli were staying in their apartment. Children at Lincoln Elementary were already using the new tablets to finish homework they used to struggle with by hand. Everywhere she looked, something had shifted. The neighborhood hadn't been transformed by noise or spectacle, but by quiet acts of care, stacked like bricks, invisible but real, like ripples moving through water, all stemming from a single drop. And deep in her heart, Mia knew the source of that drop. The man who never argued, the man who never raised his voice, the man who simply walked out into the rain. She stood, walked to the Help Wanted sign in the window and stared at it for a long moment. It had become more than a sign now. It was a symbol of hope, of change, of a moment someone chose not to forget. Then, across the street, beneath the same old tree, she saw movement again. A figure, still, watching. Not threatening, not waiting, just present. He stayed only a moment, just long enough to know things were moving, growing, becoming. Then quietly he turned and disappeared into the dusk once more. Mia pressed her hand gently to the glass, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you." Mia was starting to feel like the hotel had become a different place overnight. She walked into the lobby just after her morning shift began and paused at the entrance, something subtle but unmistakable filling the air. Lilies, fresh ones. The soft, almost powdery fragrance drifted across the space like memory itself. It was the kind of scent that didn't just decorate a room, it transformed it. Calming, gentle, unmistakably intentional. She followed the aroma to a tall arrangement sitting on the central table beside the guest book. It hadn't been there yesterday. A tasteful blend of white lilies and eucalyptus stems, wrapped in pale gold ribbon. A small tag hung delicately from one of the branches. No sender listed, just the same insignia again. Starlight Foundation. Mia's eyes moved across the lobby. Something else was different. Near the elevators, two men in blue uniforms were removing ceiling tiles and inspecting cables. Elevator maintenance crews. She walked over and gently asked, "Scheduled repairs?" One of the men looked down and smiled. "All prepaid, full internal upgrades, new cabling, backup systems, and safety reinforcements. The request came through a donor. We were told to prioritize this building." Mia nodded slowly. "Let me guess. The Starlight Foundation?" He chuckled. "You've been seeing that name too, huh? Yeah. Paid in full. No corners cut. Whoever they are, they don't mess around." Mia thanked him and returned to the front desk, where a group of housekeepers stood whispering near the side hallway. They didn't notice her at first, until one of them, Rosa, caught her eye and waved her over. "Look," Rosa said, holding up a brand new hotel uniform. It was elegant. Better fabric, better fit, and stitched just beneath the collar, barely visible unless you knew to look. A small golden star. "They were here when we arrived," Rosa said, "each one perfectly tailored, with our names inside. Even the shoes were sized, and they're so comfortable. I almost cried." Mia swallowed. "No one said who sent them." Rosa shook her head. "Just a note that said, 'Your work deserves honor.'" Not exhaustion. Mia's heart swelled. She stepped back, blinking, and felt the weight of everything building around her. Not just generosity, but precision. Whoever was behind this, they weren't guessing. They knew. They had studied this place. The people, the pain points, the little needs that had been overlooked for too long. She went behind the front desk and flipped open the invoice ledger. There it was. 3 pages down, tucked between lines of delivery documentation and hotel vendor payments. A stack of transactions, over $40,000 0 cents spent in just 2 days. Every item tracked back to the same billing source, Starlight Foundation. But one line stood out, a billing return address, downtown Los Angeles. Office Suite, 1904. No name, just a location. Mia stared at the line for a long moment, then quietly tore out the page and folded it into her pocket. She had made a decision. She was going to find out who was behind the light. The downtown bus was running late. Mia sat by the window, folded invoice page still tucked securely in her pocket. As the city passed in gray and gold streaks outside, she couldn't stop running through the events of the last 2 days. Every time she tried to convince herself that maybe this was some charitable organization doing a city-wide initiative, her instincts pulled her back. This wasn't random. This was personal. By the time the bus rolled into the Wilshire Business District, the sky had turned pale with the noon light. Office buildings stretched like glass sentinels into the sky, reflecting clouds and people and the quiet hope that cities tried to sell. He checked the invoice again. Suite 1904. She entered the building slowly. A tall marble lobby. A receptionist greeted her, but Mia gave a polite smile and simply said, "Just visiting Suite 1904. The receptionist waved her through. The elevator felt unnaturally quiet, each floor ding making her more aware of how little she knew about what she was walking into. She half expected a sleek corporate office, maybe even a foundation's headquarters with logos and branding and a receptionist in a headset. But when the elevator doors opened, there was none of that. Suite 1904 was at the end of a quiet hallway. No signage on the door, just a silver plate and a keypad entry. The light above the keypad blinked slowly. Mia stood there, unsure whether to knock. Before she could decide, the door clicked. It wasn't locked. Carefully, she pushed it open. Inside was not what she expected at all. No office furniture, no reception desk. Just a modest room, warm light spilling across polished hardwood floors. There were 2 worn leather chairs. A long wooden table, covered in folders, receipts, handwritten letters, and, at the center, a dusty coffee maker, still humming with heat. Everything about the space felt lived in, but not recently, like it had been used in passing. Not a hub, but a quiet place someone returned to when the world was sleeping. Mia stepped closer to the table and saw what looked like a ledger. Not a digital one, a real handwritten record. Pages filled with names and stories. She saw Walter's name, Mrs. Delgado's, Theo, the school, even Rosa. Each entry had a small note written beside it in tidy handwriting. Respected, seen, doing her best. Shouldn't have to choose between medicine and rent. Give her back her flowers. Mia's throat tightened. This wasn't charity. It was care. The kind that noticed people others missed. Whoever was doing this wasn't just writing checks. They were watching, listening, choosing. Then she noticed something even more surprising. A stack of printed resumes. Dozens of them. And each one had the same cover letter. It was addressed to the Sterling Palace Hotel. The signature at the bottom had been cut off. But Mia already knew whose presence lingered in the room. She didn't need a name. She'd seen him walk away in the rain. Mia stood in the quiet room, the air around her still and full of answers she hadn't known she was asking. She carefully folded one of the resumes and slipped it back into the stack. Her hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the overwhelming realization that someone had built an entire operation around kindness and anonymity. No headlines, no social media posts, just a quiet ripple of change, starting with one man and flowing into dozens of lives. As she turned to leave, her eyes caught one last detail. Taped to the inside of the door, almost hidden at eye level, was a yellowed sticky note. The handwriting was unmistakably the same as in the ledger. It read, "If you want to change the world, don't start with noise. Start with people." She stood there for another moment, memorizing the words, then stepped out into the hallway, gently pulling the door shut behind her. Back on the street, the city hadn't changed. Cars still honked, sidewalks were still cracked, strangers still passed without making eye contact. But something inside Mia had shifted. The weight of what she knew, the mystery that had once filled her with confusion, now pulsed with purpose. She didn't have to wonder anymore. The man in the hoodie, the one who was turned away without a second glance, hadn't vanished. He had multiplied. Through uniforms, lilies, laptops, surgeries, and handwritten notes. He had made himself invisible only to lift others into view. And now she understood the assignment. Back at the hotel, Mia walked straight to the lobby and looked again at the kitchen staff wanted sign taped to the window. It hadn't been removed. No one had even touched it. She gently peeled it off. Then she turned it over and wrote a new message on the blank side in large, clear letters. "Thank you. We see you now." She taped it back to the glass. And as the sun broke through the clouds for the first time that week, a quiet warmth settled across the lobby. A whisper, no longer unnoticed. A ripple, now returned. The office building at 1030 Silverton Avenue looked like something out of an architectural magazine. Polished steel and glass. Elegant lighting. Not a fingerprint on the doors. The kind of place that felt expensive to breathe in. Mia tightened her scarf as she approached the main entrance. The sun had set an hour earlier, and the air held the chill of early spring. Her steps echoed across the wide lobby as she entered, heels clicking on marble. At the front desk, a security guard was flipping through a paperback novel, his feet propped up discreetly behind the counter. He looked up as she approached, setting the book aside with a polite smile. "Evening," he said. Mia gave a nod, trying to steady her voice. "Hi, I'm looking for Suite 900. Starlight Foundation?" The guard blinked, then frowned thoughtfully. He pulled a clipboard from a drawer and scanned it. "Starlight Foundation?" he repeated. "Never heard of them." She leaned slightly over the desk, pointing at the list. "Suite 900? He scanned the sheet, then reached for a laminated floor plan and flipped through it. Suite 900's been vacant for, let me see. He squinted at a printed note taped inside the folder. Almost 9 months. Used to be a small film distributor's office. They cleared out before New Year's. Mia's stomach turned slightly. But someone's still using it. The guard raised an eyebrow. I don't think so. Maintenance goes through once a month to check water lines. Last note said it's empty. You sure you got the right place? Mia hesitated. She thought of the receipts, the address on the invoice, the handwritten ledger, the resumes. Yes, she said quietly. This is the address. He gave her a look that was more curious than suspicious. You're not the first person to ask, actually. Last week, a guy came looking for the same suite. Said he got a package from here, but we told him the same thing. He leaned back in his chair, glancing at the overhead camera feed. You can take the elevator up if you want, 5th floor, but don't be surprised if it's just an empty room. Mia thanked him and crossed to the elevator bay. Inside, the elevator hummed softly as she ascended. Her reflection looked strange in the polished mirror wall. Tense, hopeful, cautious. She tried to tell herself she was just chasing a ghost, but something in her gut insisted there was more. The elevator chimed. 5th floor. She stepped into the hallway. Clean, quiet, but distinctly empty. The kind of empty that doesn't invite curiosity. Just past the vending machine and a row of locked glass doors, Suite 900 stood at the end. No nameplate, no sign of use. But one thing stopped her in her tracks. A faint light glowing underneath the door. She stepped closer, heart pounding. Mia's hand hovered near the door frame, not quite touching it. The narrow strip of light glowing from beneath the door was warm, golden. Nothing harsh or artificial. It looked like the soft glow of a desk lamp, the kind used for reading or writing, not the cold fluorescence typical of vacant offices. She leaned in gently and pressed her ear against the door. Nothing. Not a voice. Not a footstep. Not even the hum of electronics. Just stillness. She pulled back and glanced down the hallway. Not a soul in sight. She gave the door a slight push. Locked. No keypad this time. Just a standard brass knob and deadbolt. The kind you'd find in an old apartment, not an upscale office. She knocked once. Softly. No answer. She knocked again. Still nothing. Feeling the sting of nerves crawling up her arms, she stepped back and stared at the frosted glass pane beside the door. The inner shade had been drawn, blocking any view into the room, but the edges let a sliver of light through. She crouched slightly, trying to see under the door. It was too narrow, but she could make out something moving. Just a shadow, shifting, slow and steady, like someone walking past a desk. Then it paused. Mia held her breath. She wasn't imagining this. Someone was in there. She stood and took a step back, unsure of what to do next. A part of her wanted to knock again, to call out. Another part told her she was trespassing into something sacred. Before she could decide, the light inside flickered slightly. Not out, just dimmer, as if the lamp had been partially blocked. Her eyes shot to the frosted glass, and that's when she saw it. A silhouette, perfectly still. Not 10 feet from the door, behind the glass. Watching her, the shape was tall, broad-shouldered, one hand resting on what looked like the back of a chair, the other lowered at their side. The posture wasn't threatening, but it wasn't passive either. It was calm, deliberate. She couldn't see a face, just the outline, and the sense of someone quietly registering her presence. Mia stepped backward, instinct tightening in her chest. The silhouette didn't move. She looked down the hallway again, hoping someone else might appear, that someone could confirm she wasn't losing her mind. When she looked back, the light was off, and the silhouette was gone. Mia blinked, stunned. The space behind the frosted glass was now pitch black. The glow beneath the door had vanished. and the silence returned, heavier this time, as if even the air knew something had shifted. She stared at the door for a few more seconds, unsure if she should knock again. Her hand moved toward the knob, paused, then fell away. Something told her it wasn't time yet. She turned and walked away down the hall, her steps quicker now. By the time Mia reached the building's exit, her pulse was still racing. The lobby was quiet, the security guard gone on his break. Outside, the sidewalk glistened with recent rain, the air carrying the faint scent of ozone and spring flowers from a nearby planter. She paused just before pushing open the door, instinct pulling her to glance back once more. Through the glass panes, her eyes rose toward the 5th floor. Most of the windows were dark, blending into the night sky like quiet mirrors. But one stood out, Suite 900. The light was back on, dim, golden, just like before, and standing behind the window was the silhouette again. Still, watching. This time the figure didn't vanish. It remained in full view, unmoving, almost as though waiting for her to notice. Mia froze on the sidewalk. A chill swept over her, not from fear, but from recognition. Something in the stance, the stillness, the presence. It wasn't just anyone. She couldn't explain it, but she knew. Keanu Reeves? She remembered the night at the hotel, the way he had stood in the rain, silent and patient. The kindness in his eyes when he'd looked at the help wanted sign. The quiet nod before he walked away. It was the same quiet now, the same gaze. She wanted to call out, to wave, to ask why he hadn't come through the front door like anyone else. Why the disguise, the donations, the mystery? But deep down, she understood. It was never about being seen. It was about seeing. The Starlight Foundation wasn't a brand. It was a lens, a mirror, a hand extended quietly in a noisy world. She stood on the sidewalk, the glow from the 5th floor casting just enough light to reflect in the puddle beneath her feet. In that reflection, her own silhouette stood beside the taller one above. Not alone. Not anymore. Mia reached into her coat pocket, pulled out her notepad, and jotted a single sentence beneath all her scribbled names, donations, and rumors. He's still watching, but not for thanks, for readiness. She slipped the notepad back in, turned and began walking home beneath the city lights, not looking back again. But from the 5th floor, the silhouette lingered a little longer, before quietly fading into the dark once more. By mid-morning, the lobby of the Sterling Palace Hotel was bustling in a way it hadn't in years. The floral scent of fresh lilies still floated in the air, and the staff moved with new energy. Polished shoes, crisp uniforms, easy smiles. It looked like a place reborn. Mia stood at the front desk, adjusting the flower arrangement as a woman stepped through the revolving glass doors. She was tall, confident, with silver-gray hair cut short and sharp. A leather notebook peeked from her satchel. Her ID badge read C. Howard, Human Impact Weekly. "I'm here to see Gregory Langston," the woman said. The manager emerged a moment later, his usual swagger dimmed ever since the odd string of events had begun. Still, he offered a professional handshake. "Mr. Langston," the woman nodded. "Celia Howard, journalist. I'm doing a piece on rapid turnarounds in hospitality. I heard this hotel has had quite a transformation." Gregory's eyebrows lifted with pride. "Indeed. We've had some exciting developments, new investments, community outreach, upgrades. All of it tied to something called the Starlight Foundation?" she asked, flipping open her notepad. Yes, some philanthropic support, very generous. Anonymous, of course," he cleared his throat. Celia tilted her head slightly. "You do know it's part of Keanu Reeves' initiative, right?" The words hit the room like a dropped glass. Gregory blinked. I'm sorry? Keanu Reeves. The Starlight Foundation is linked to him. Several nonprofits confirmed it. Quiet giving, no press, but effective. The upgrades here, the donations across the block, the school grants, they all trace back to him. Mia, standing just a few feet behind the desk, felt the air shift. Her breath caught in her chest. It was no longer speculation. Someone else had confirmed it. She stepped forward, slowly. "It's true," she said softly. "He was here. That night." Gregory turned to her, stunned. "What are you talking about?" Mia swallowed. Her voice was calm but steady. "The man you turned away in the rain? The one you told to try the motor lodge across the highway? That was Keanu Reeves." The color drained from Gregory's face. He stumbled back a step, nearly colliding with the edge of the counter. That can't be. That was just some guy in a hoodie." "A hoodie that was soaked through from volunteering at the youth center," Mia added. "And jeans faded from years of use, not fashion. But yes, that was him." Silence blanketed the lobby for a full 5 seconds. Gregory's hands gripped the counter as he lowered himself slowly into the nearest chair. His mouth opened, then closed again. Celia clicked her pen and scribbled something into her notebook. "I'd like to hear everything, from the beginning." Mia nodded, her eyes steady. "It started with rain," she said. Mia led Celia to the staff lounge, a modest space with a round table, a coffee machine that had only recently started working properly, and the faint scent of lemon-scented cleaner. Gregory followed behind, still dazed, as if each step brought him closer to some irreversible realization. Celia set up her voice recorder, though Mia noticed she hardly looked at it. Her eyes were focused, steady, quietly absorbing every expression. "Tell me what you saw," Celia asked, her voice low. Mia took a breath. It was raining, harder than usual for late spring. I had just finished checking in a family with 2 tired kids. That's when I saw him. "Did you recognize him right away?" "No," Mia admitted. "He was soaked, hair clinging to his face, hoodie pulled tight. He didn't carry himself like a movie star, just humble, tired, quiet." He asked for a room. Celia turned to Gregory. "And you?" Gregory looked as if he might throw up. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I took one look at him and he didn't fit the image. We've always had a dress code, unofficial, but you know, expectations." "You told him to try the motel," Mia said gently. Gregory nodded slowly, and he just left. Celia raised an eyebrow. "No anger?" "None," Mia answered. He looked at the help wanted sign taped to the window, nodded once, then walked back into the rain. Silence lingered again before Celia spoke. "So, what happened next?" Mia smiled, bittersweet. The next morning, kitchen deliveries started. Appliances, premium ingredients. Nobody knew who paid. Then Walter's surgery, the florist across the street, the school, the elevator crews, all of it quiet. Always under the name Starlight Foundation. "And you started connecting the dots?" "Yes, piece by piece." Celia leaned forward. "Did you ever speak with him again?" Mia hesitated. "No, but I saw him twice. Once standing beneath the tree outside the hotel, and once in the 5th-floor window of the downtown office building where Starlight was supposedly based." "It was him? I know it was." Saria looked back to Gregory. "Did you feel anything change? In you?" He sat up, his face pale but no longer defensive. "Yes," he whispered. "Shame. First, then awe. Someone like him didn't humiliate me, didn't expose me. He let me learn the hard way, and he changed everything. Not just here, but in the way I see people now." Celia wrote something quickly in her notebook. "You're not the first. He's done this before. Quietly. People call it Reeves' way. Kindness without conditions. Correction without cruelty." Mia blinked. "Is that what this is now? A movement?" Celia smiled. No, not yet. But it could be. There was a knock at the lounge door. Walter stood there, holding a tray with 3 fresh cups of coffee and a new spring in his step. His knee didn't tremble anymore. He offered them to the table with a grateful grin. None of them said a word for a moment. The truth was no longer hidden. Celia took a sip from the coffee cup, letting the warmth settle before she glanced up at Mia. Would you be willing to go on record? Mia hesitated. I'm not looking for fame. Celia nodded. That's exactly why your voice matters. Mia looked at Gregory. He gave a small, almost apologetic nod. I'll do it, Mia said softly. As long as people understand this isn't a story about shame. It's about what someone did after being judged and how that changed everything. Celia pressed the recorder again. Last question, if you could say something to him now, what would it be? Mia exhaled slowly. Her words came out steady, like a quiet prayer. I'd say, thank you. Not for the appliances or the uniforms or the flowers, but for showing us what dignity looks like, for not making us feel small even when we deserved it. She paused, then added, and for reminding us that you never know who you're looking at until you look with your heart. Celia didn't speak. She simply stopped the recorder, closed her notebook, and sat still for a moment. Outside, the rain had stopped. Sunlight poured through the windows, illuminating the hotel lobby like a quiet blessing. Wordless, Walter opened the door for Celia as she left. She turned back, gave them one last smile, and disappeared into the city. That night, the hotel staff gathered in the lounge. No speech, no announcement, just people sitting side by side, knowing they were now part of something bigger than themselves. Mia stepped out to the sidewalk for some air. The streets shimmered in the evening glow. Across the avenue, beneath the same tree as before, stood a familiar silhouette, still, calm, watching. This time he nodded. And this time Mia smiled and nodded back. He turned and walked away unnoticed by the world, except for the people he had quietly lifted. And as the last light of day slipped behind the rooftops, a single idea lingered in Mia's heart. Sometimes the most powerful voices are the ones that never need to be heard. 2 mornings after the interview, the Sterling Palace Hotel felt different. There was no memo, no announcement, but the energy had shifted. People whispered less and greeted each other more. Eye contact lingered longer. Even the usual hum of the espresso machine in the cafe seemed gentler somehow, like the entire building had taken a breath. At exactly 10 a.m., the front desk bell rang 3 times, a sound rarely heard in the grand lobby unless something urgent was about to unfold. Mia looked up from organizing brochures. Her eyes met Gregory's. He stood at the center of the marble floor, tie slightly loosened, hands trembling just enough to be noticeable. One by one, employees peeked out from hallways and service doors. Housekeepers in their new uniforms, kitchen staff in aprons, bellhops with polished shoes. Even Walter arrived, leaning slightly on a sleek cane someone had donated just days earlier. Gregory waited until the entire staff had gathered. I'd like to say something, he began. No microphone, no podium, just a man trying to find the words. I've worked here for over 16 years. I've seen this lobby filled with celebrities, dignitaries, even royalty, and I've prided myself on maintaining a certain standard. But last week, I failed that standard in the worst way possible. He paused. A few heads turned toward Mia. You all know by now what happened. A man came in. He was drenched, worn out, quiet. He didn't fit the image I had of someone who belonged here, so I turned him away. I told him to try the motel across the highway. There were murmurs, low and uneasy. Gregory raised his hand slightly. But here's what you may not know. That same man didn't curse me, didn't argue. He didn't try to prove who he was. He just looked at a handwritten sign in the window and walked away. And the next morning, everything started changing. He swallowed hard. I judged a book by its cover. Worse, I dismissed a human being based on what he wore. And I turned away someone who ended up giving us more than we deserved. The lobby was silent. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he continued, but I am asking for us to be better. All of us. We work at a place that calls itself a palace. It's time we acted like it. Not just with marble floors and fine linen, but with decency, humility, and heart. He turned slightly toward Mia. There's one person here who recognized him, and who's been quietly doing the right thing ever since. Mia, would you speak? Her breath caught. For a moment, the weight of silence pressed on her like rain. But then she stepped forward. Mia stepped into the open space in the lobby. Her heart was pounding, but her voice was steady. I didn't say anything that night, she began. I saw him, soaked from the rain, quiet, kind, and I recognized him right away. I grew up watching his movies. Keanu Reeves wasn't just a name to me. He was someone who always carried grace through pain, and when he stood here, being dismissed, I froze. Her eyes met Gregory's. He didn't flinch. I told myself I was just a concierge, that it wasn't my place, that maybe it wasn't really him, but deep down, I knew. I stayed silent, and it's haunted me every day since. She turned to the rest of the staff. But then, things started happening. The appliances, the uniforms, the grant for Mrs. Delgado, the new supplies at Lincoln Elementary, Walter's surgery. Her voice cracked slightly. All of it came from the same name, the Starlight Foundation. She held up a small, worn notepad, the one she'd been filling with every act of kindness tied to the foundation. Names, addresses, gifts, gratitude, a growing web of grace. I started connecting the dots. I followed the paperwork. I went to the office suite, and each time I felt closer to something. But he never made himself known. He didn't want the credit. A ripple moved through the staff. Some nodded. Others looked stunned. Mia continued. He didn't want to shame us. He didn't demand an apology. He just quietly changed everything. Not with power, not with fame, but with humility. She paused again. That moment changed me. It showed me that silence can be a form of complicity, but it can also be transformed. It taught me that one act of kindness, when done with love, has the power to ripple far beyond what we can see. She looked at Walter, who was now seated on a nearby bench. I saw you smile again, Walter, for the first time in months. I saw Mrs. Callahan cry over a shipment of fresh spices. I saw children running with laptops in their arms, all because one man believed we could be better. There was a long, thoughtful silence. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was reverent. Then Mia took a deep breath and said the words no one had yet dared to say out loud. I think we owe it to him, and to ourselves, to keep what he started going. She stepped back, her cheeks flushed but proud. And as the silence settled again, something began to stir in the hearts of the people standing around her. Mrs. Callahan stepped forward next, wiping her hands on her apron. Then let's do it, she said firmly. Let's make this hotel known not just for luxury, but for kindness. Walter nodded, his voice quiet but strong. He helped me walk again. The least we can do is walk in his footsteps. One by one, the staff began voicing ideas. A mentorship program for at-risk youth, a weekly community dinner using the hotel kitchen, discounts for local families, rooms reserved for emergency shelter. Gregory listened, his head bowed. Then he raised it and said, "From today forward, the Sterling Palace isn't just a place for the wealthy. It's a place for dignity, for hope, and for second chances." The golden star on their uniforms glinted in the morning light. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, and far down the street, a man in a hoodie kept walking. It was a quiet Wednesday afternoon when the front doors of the Sterling Palace Hotel slowly opened. The usual buzz of conversation in the lobby fell silent. A man stepped through the entrance wearing a simple, tailored black suit. No entourage, no fanfare, no announcement. Just calm steps on polished marble, and the subtle sway of a long, black coat dampened at the hem by the misty rain outside. Mia was the first to see him. She'd been arranging fresh lilies at the front desk, a new ritual the staff adopted in his honor. Her hands froze mid-stem. Her eyes widened. Then she whispered, "He's back." The words rippled like a wind through tall grass. Housekeepers glanced up from folding fresh towels. Bellhops paused beside gleaming luggage carts. The concierge stilled mid-Gonor call. And then Walter, the elderly bellhop with a new spring in his step, dropped his clipboard and hurried toward the man. "Mr. Reeves," he said, voice thick with emotion, "you gave me back my knees." Keanu smiled warmly and extended both hands, clasping Walter's. "You gave me something too, Walter," he replied gently. "Your grace." Walter pulled him into a hug, tears freely running down his cheeks. The lobby remained still, as if holding its breath. Then Mrs. Callahan emerged from the hallway, wiping her hands on her apron as she approached. "Come see the kitchen," she beamed. "It sings now." Keanu nodded, visibly touched. "I'd love that." He walked further in and, one by one, the staff who had once ignored him, judged him, or quietly observed him that rainy night, began to come forward. But no one said, "I'm sorry." Instead, they said, "Thank you." They thanked him for the new supplies at the school, for Walter's surgery, for the electric ovens that never shorted, for the safety rails in the staff stairwell, for the food pantry he quietly funded for employees' families. They thanked him not with guilt, but with changed hearts. Keanu followed Mrs. Callahan into the kitchen, where the air was fragrant with rosemary and warm bread. Stainless steel counters gleamed under newly installed pendant lights. Pots simmered softly on induction stovetops. A line cook waved shyly from the back, while a pastry chef, her hands dusted with flour, offered him a warm croissant with a bashful smile. Mrs. Callahan held her head high. Before, this kitchen was falling apart. We made do. Now, we create. And that's because of you. Keanu accepted the pastry, but shook his head lightly. "It's because of what you do with it." She laughed softly, wiping her cheek. "Still humble. I should have known." As they returned to the lobby, more staff had gathered. The atmosphere had shifted. It wasn't about his fame. It was about the mystery man who changed their lives without demanding credit. Mia stepped forward from the front desk. Her hands were clasped together, slightly trembling. She had played that night over and over in her head, wondering if she should have spoken up, wondering if she had failed to act in a moment that mattered. Keanu noticed her and gave a small nod of recognition. "I knew it was you that night," she said softly. He didn't answer with words, just waited. "I wanted to say something," Mia continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I froze. I was afraid." Keanu's gaze softened. "I'm not proud of it," she added, tears forming. "But I've tried to do better since." He stepped closer and said gently, "That's all any of us can do." Mia exhaled deeply, like something heavy had finally lifted. Then she asked the question that had been living in her chest for days. "Why did you help us?" Keanu looked around the lobby as if taking in every small change, the golden stars stitched on staff collars, the fresh flowers near the elevator, the quiet pride in their posture. Then he turned back to Mia and replied, "Because I was once helped in secret too, and I never forgot." The room grew silent again, not out of awkwardness, but reverence. There was something sacred in the way he said it, as if this story, whatever it was, had shaped everything that followed. Walter, standing beside him, tilted his head. "Do you mind if we ask who helped you?" Keanu gave a faint smile. "When I was 19, I was broke and alone. One night I collapsed outside a diner in Toronto after working back-to-back shifts. I hadn't eaten all day. A woman who cleaned the place found me. She didn't ask who I was. She just brought me soup, let me sleep in the supply room, and left a $20 bill in my pocket. I never saw her again, but that kindness carried me farther than any movie deal ever could. The silence that followed was a different kind. Gentle, awe-filled. Keanu's eyes swept the room. You can't always repay the person who helped you, but you can pass it forward, quietly, so someone else can stand up again. Mia's notepad slipped from her hands, unnoticed. What he said wasn't a performance. There were no cameras, no charity banners, no speechwriters, just a man remembering pain and choosing to answer it with compassion. Mrs. Callahan placed a hand over her heart. Walter whispered, "That woman. She'll never know what she started." Keanu nodded. "That's the point. Some people plant seeds they never live to see grow." Gregory Langston, who had stayed near the front of the lobby, finally stepped forward. The memory of that night, the judgment, the arrogance, the mistake, still burned in his chest. He extended his hand. "I don't expect forgiveness," Gregory said, "but I'm grateful for the second chance you gave all of us." Keanu looked at him for a long moment, then took his hand. "You gave it to yourselves. I just lit a match." The lobby exhaled. The weight of past mistakes wasn't erased, but something better had replaced it. Growth, change, a quiet vow. Keanu didn't stay long. He toured the kitchen once more, shook hands with each staff member, and paused beside the Help Wanted sign still taped inside the window. He smiled. "I like that it's still here." Mia stepped beside him. "We leave it up as a reminder that sometimes the people we turn away are the very ones meant to help us." Keanu nodded once. Then, without ceremony, he stepped back into the street. No limo waited, no cameras followed. Just the sound of rain beginning again, soft on the pavement, as the door closed behind him. And inside the hotel, the staff stood together, changed, not because a celebrity visited, but because a man returned to a place that once rejected him, only to leave it filled with light. The next morning, just as the staff finished breakfast prep and the lobby settled into its usual rhythm, Keanu returned, not alone this time, but with a gentle purpose in his step. He had asked Gregory and Mia to gather the team in the banquet hall, not for a press event, but for something more intimate. They stood in a semicircle beneath the vaulted ceiling, the morning light slanting through tall windows, casting soft patterns on the polished floor. Most assumed he was there to offer thanks or encouragement. Instead, he looked at them for a long moment before beginning quietly. "You've seen the results of what happened here," he said. "The new equipment, the uniforms, the flowers, the upgrades. But what you haven't seen is why." He took a step closer. "I came here the night of the storm not just by chance. This place, this very building, is part of my story." The room grew still. Mia felt her breath catch. "I was 9 years old the first time I came here," Keanu continued. "It was winter. My mother had just left an abusive relationship. We had nowhere to go, no money, no home. She'd heard from someone at her church that this hotel occasionally offered spare rooms to struggling families in emergencies." He glanced around the room. Some staff members lowered their eyes, already sensing where the story was going. He dressed me up in my best sweater, brushed the snow off my shoes with her bare hands, and brought me here, hoping someone would see our dignity, even if we were down. He paused. His voice didn't waver, but the memory carried weight. "We walked in through those same glass doors." She spoke gently, respectfully. I remember the man behind the counter barely looking up. He told us, coldly, that this is not a shelter, and pointed to a bench across the street. Keanu's eyes moved to the corner of the room, as if he could still see that memory frozen in time. I still remember the way my mother smiled at me after. She said, "We'll find somewhere better." But I knew it hurt her. Mia swallowed hard. Walter gripped the back of a chair. Even Gregory blinked rapidly. "I swore that night," Keanu said softly, "if I ever had a chance to make sure no one was ever turned away like that again, I would take it." He looked at them, not accusingly, not with resentment, just truthfully. "So, when your manager turned me away that night in the rain, I wasn't angry. I was reminded." Another pause. He let the word settle. "You reminded me," Keanu said, "that pain can come full circle, but so can kindness." For a long moment, no one moved. Keanu's voice, so calm and steady, echoed in their minds like the hush after a storm. The staff didn't know where to look. Some stared at the floor, others at him. But the weight in the room wasn't shame. It was realization. He continued, his tone still gentle. "That night I stood here again, soaking wet, tired, after a long day at the youth center. I wasn't expecting red carpet treatment, I just needed a quiet room to sleep. And when Gregory told me to leave, I could have walked away and done nothing." He looked around the circle, making eye contact with each of them. But I remembered the bench, I remembered the pain on my mother's face, and I thought, maybe this is the bench moment for someone else. Maybe it doesn't have to end the same way. Keanu nodded toward Walter, who stood still, hands at his sides. When I saw Walter limping, I knew he was pushing through something just to serve others. And when I saw that help wanted sign in the window, taped crooked and fading at the edges, I saw a place, trying, but barely holding on. Mia's hands trembled slightly as she clutched the notepad she always kept with her. She wasn't writing now, just listening. "So I made a call," Keanu said, "to some friends, people who understand what it means to give quietly. The Starlight Foundation isn't a big name. That's intentional. It's made up of people who've all once been turned away, who've all had a bench moment, and who believe we can rewrite those stories." Gasps spread through the room. The truth was bigger than they imagined. The kitchen equipment, the laptops for the school, the florist across the street who got to keep her shop. It was never about charity. It was about redemption, about giving back, not out of guilt, but gratitude. Mrs. Callahan, arms crossed in disbelief, stepped forward. "Why here, though? Out of all the places in the world, why this hotel?" Keanu gave a soft smile. "Because this was where it started for me. And if you want to heal something, you go back to the wound." A murmur rippled through the group. Several of the housekeeping staff quietly wiped their eyes. Gregory finally spoke. "Mr. Reeves." "I?" Keanu gently raised a hand. "No need. I wasn't looking for an apology. What I see here now, this staff, this spirit, the way you've embraced change, that is more powerful than any sorry could ever be." Then Mia found her voice. "Hey, why didn't you tell us sooner?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned to her, his expression warm. "Because sometimes silence teaches more than speeches ever can." That answer struck something deep inside her. "We were blind," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "No," Keanu replied. "You were human. We all are. What matters is what we do after the truth shows up." He looked around one last time, then said, "This hotel, it's different now. Not because of me, because of you. I just lit a small match. You're the ones who turned it into a flame." Mia stepped forward, eyes glossy, voice trembling with emotion. "You didn't just light a match. You reminded us what warmth feels like." Walter, standing beside her, gently added, "You gave me back my knees, but more than that, you gave me back my pride." One by one, the staff began to speak. A housekeeper mentioned how she'd finally sent her daughter to dance classes because of the extra support. A concierge said his mother's medical bills had been covered by an anonymous gift. All the stories led back to one quiet truth. Someone had cared enough to see them. Keanu took it all in without fanfare. No spotlight, no grand posture, just gratitude. Then he said, "Kindness doesn't need a name attached. It only needs to be passed on." Silence fell again, but this time it was full, not empty. Like a pause between musical notes, holding more meaning than sound ever could. Mia closed her notebook and didn't need to write anything down. She knew now. The story wasn't just about a movie star who returned. It was about what happens when someone turns pain into purpose and changes an entire community in the process. The air in the Sterling Palace lobby had changed. No longer stiff and perfumed with superiority, it now pulsed with quiet excitement and possibility. Keanu stood near the fireplace, hands in his pockets, surrounded by people who only a week ago had been strangers, divided by uniforms and roles. Now, they were collaborators, partners. He took a breath and said, "I believe this building could be more than a hotel." That caught everyone's attention. Gregory raised an eyebrow, curious but silent. Mia tilted her head slightly, sensing something important was about to unfold. Keanu continued, "I think we can turn part of the hotel into a space the community can actually use. A place where people can heal, learn, create. Maybe a community arts and wellness center." Murmurs stirred, not of resistance, but intrigue. Mrs. Callahan, who had been leaning on the reception desk with her arms crossed, suddenly lit up. "You mean cooking classes?" she asked, her voice sharp with interest. "I've been teaching my grandkids how to make their great-grandmother's tamales. I'd love to teach more kids if we had a real kitchen." Walter's hand lifted slowly, the same hand once stiff from years of strain. "I could teach the young guys how to carry luggage right," he said, a smile tugging at his lips. "And maybe how to carry themselves, too." A soft laugh rippled across the room. Mia stepped forward, her notepad in hand. "There are teenagers down the block with no idea how to build a resume, open a bank account, or speak in a job interview. What if we offered basic business training, interview skills, digital literacy, maybe even a small internship program?" Gregory, who had been quiet, finally spoke. "We have an unused floor, 3rd floor. It's been dormant since the renovation 2 years ago. I've been trying to lease it, but maybe..." He paused, scanning the faces in the room. "Maybe we convert it into transitional housing for working families, people who just need a few months of stability to get back on their feet." You could feel the shift in posture, in energy, in breath. The hotel staff, once accustomed to hierarchy and silence, were now brainstorming like a collective heartbeat. Mia began scribbling notes quickly. "Guest lecture series from local artists," she mumbled aloud. "Free breakfasts for seniors on Sundays," Walter added. Mrs. Callahan laughed. "As long as I don't have to serve scrambled eggs from a box." Gregory chuckled for the first time in days. "Deal. Real eggs, fresh herbs, maybe from our own rooftop garden." Keanu nodded, letting their ideas build. This was what he hoped for. Not just change initiated from above, but change born from within. These people had the vision. They only needed space, belief, and a chance. The Sterling Palace, once a monument to exclusion, was slowly becoming something else, something living. The following morning, the hotel lobby resembled a community center more than a 5-star establishment. A whiteboard was rolled in from the conference room and stood near the reception desk. On it, Mia had written in bold blue marker, "Ideas for the future, write yours here." It took less than an hour for the board to fill up. Porters, housekeepers, kitchen staff, and even longtime guests came by to add suggestions. A local photographer proposed free headshots for people seeking jobs. One of the younger bellhops suggested a mentorship program for local high schoolers interested in hospitality. A maintenance worker named Luis offered to teach basic handyman skills on weekends: plumbing, wiring, drywall repair, things that weren't taught in schools anymore. Gregory watched it all from the second-floor balcony, leaning on the railing. He was no longer overseeing with suspicion. Now he was observing with wonder. "Did we really work in this same building a week ago?" he asked quietly, more to himself than anyone else. Mia heard him. She looked up and smiled. "It doesn't feel like the same place, does it?" He shook his head. "No. It feels lighter." That afternoon, Keanu called for an informal meeting in the hotel's ballroom. Word had spread through the neighborhood, and a few curious locals were invited to join. Folding chairs were set up in neat rows, the chandelier above casting a soft glow. There were no microphones, no cameras, no press, just people. Keanu stood at the front, not elevated on a stage, but grounded among them. "I came back to this hotel not to correct the past," he said, "but to honor what it taught me. That how we treat people in their hardest moment says more about us than how we celebrate their success." He turned slightly, gesturing to the staff seated behind him. "These people," he continued, "saw a mistake, and instead of ignoring it, they turned it into something transformative." Applause broke out. Not loud, not theatrical, but real. Then Keanu did something no one expected. He opened a folder and handed it to Gregory. "These are the preliminary architectural plans," Keanu said. "I asked a nonprofit design team to draft ideas for converting the third floor into transitional housing and the West Wing into the Community Arts and Wellness Center." Gregory opened the folder and stared in awe. Detailed floor plans, sketches of communal lounges, multi-purpose rooms, and garden layouts filled the pages. "How much did this cost?" Gregory asked, still flipping through. Keanu smiled. "It's already covered by the Starlight Foundation." A hush fell over the ballroom again. Walter blinked slowly, overwhelmed. Mrs. Callahan wiped her hands on her apron, visibly choked up. Mia's eyes welled with tears. She felt the enormity of what was unfolding. This wasn't just about new rooms or new roles. It was about restoring dignity, one gesture at a time. The Sterling Palace Hotel had begun its transformation, not with marble floors or gold-plated fixtures, but with intention. In the quiet that followed Keanu's announcement, a little girl stood up near the back of the room. She was no older than 7, her hair in 2 puffy braids, holding her father's hand. She shyly raised a drawing, a crayon sketch of the hotel, surrounded by people holding hands. Keanu knelt to meet her eye level. "Is that us?" he asked gently. She nodded. "Daddy said this place is going to help people smile again." The room melted. Gregory stepped forward, placing a hand on Keanu's shoulder. "We have the blueprint now, but it's not just about walls or furniture. It's about people. From today on, this hotel serves something bigger than comfort. It serves hope." Walter raised his hand, smiling. "Then let's get to work." The staff broke into spontaneous applause, not rehearsed or required, but born from something deeply genuine, something sacred. The Sterling Palace Hotel had just become something new, not a luxury retreat, but a beacon, an open door, a second chance. 3 weeks later, the Sterling Palace Hotel looked nothing like it once did. The grand lobby still gleamed with its iconic marble floors and crystal chandeliers, but now, woven through the elegance, there was a warmth that couldn't be bought. The mahogany front desk was lined with fresh flowers, placed daily by Mrs. Delgado, the elderly florist whose shop had been saved. Above the entrance, a new lighted sign read, "The Sterling, a home for all." Outside, the sidewalk buzzed with excitement. A line wrapped around the block. People weren't just waiting to get a look inside a luxury hotel. They were coming for something else. Something they'd read about in newspapers, seen trending online, or heard from neighbors. News vans were parked along the street. Reporters held microphones as drones floated overhead, capturing aerial shots of the red carpet, rolled out not for celebrities, but for community members, families, and overlooked heroes. Walter stood near the door, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy mule uniform with golden buttons. He was no longer a weary bellhop hiding pain in his knees. Today he stood tall, pain-free, and smiling. Next to him, Mrs. Callahan wore a chef's coat with a stitched heart emblem on the sleeve, ready to lead her first cooking class in the new downstairs community kitchen. Mia moved through the crowd with a clipboard, helping guests find their way inside. She looked over the transformed lobby and swallowed the lump in her throat. It wasn't just a reopening. It was redemption made real. The very space where judgment once stood had become a sanctuary. Gregory stood at the center of it all, looking entirely changed. Gone was the smug posture and haughty expression. Today he wore a soft gray suit and humble eyes. He traded authority for accountability. At exactly noon, he stepped onto a small platform that had been set up near the grand staircase and tapped the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice shaky. 3 weeks ago, this hotel was a place of exclusion. We chased perfection, not purpose. And I was part of that problem. A respectful silence settled over the room. But then, he continued, glancing toward Keanu, who stood quietly off to the side, someone reminded us that real hospitality doesn't begin at the front desk. It begins in the heart. Applause broke out, gentle at first, then swelling. "And so," Gregory went on, motioning to the open elevator bays behind him, "you'll notice that today we aren't just reopening a hotel. We're unveiling a movement. A new floor dedicated to transitional housing, a dining room where no one eats alone, a studio for the young to tell their stories, and every hallway from this moment forward will echo with a simple truth. Everyone matters." There was no grand fanfare, no ribbon cutting with gold scissors. Instead, Gregory stepped aside and looked at Keanu, inviting him with a nod. Keanu hesitated, then took the stage as the room waited. Keanu stepped onto the platform, slowly, hands tucked into the pockets of his simple black suit. The applause was instant but subdued, more reverent than celebratory. He looked out over the crowd. People from every walk of life stood shoulder to shoulder. The woman from the diner down the street, the young boy who'd once been seen panhandling outside the hotel, now wearing a crisp volunteer badge, a veteran with tears in his eyes, the same security guard who had silently observed from the corner during Keanu's first visit, now stood front and center, hands clasped tightly. Keanu cleared his throat, pausing as if weighing every word before releasing it. "I never planned to speak today," he began, "but I've learned that silence isn't always kindness. Sometimes it keeps the healing from starting." A hush fell across the room. "This place," he said, turning slightly to gesture behind him, "used to be a symbol of status, of distance, of rules made to protect the powerful from the struggling. But the truth is, the people who built this hotel, who ran it day and night, who kept it spotless, weren't the ones sleeping in the penthouses. They were the ones cleaning them." A few heads nodded. Mia pressed her hand over her chest. "I know what it's like to be turned away," Keanu continued. "When I was a kid, my mother and I were just trying to find a warm meal and a safe night. We came here, this very building." She asked for help. They laughed at her. I remember the feeling not just of hunger, but of being unseen. He paused. The memory hung in the room like a soft echo. I never forgot that night, and maybe, in some strange way, it's what led me here again. He turned to the staff. "You all have transformed this place into something far more powerful than marble and glass. You've made it a place where dignity lives, where second chances walk freely, where a bellhop isn't just a uniform, but a man who teaches kindness to every soul he meets." Walter blinked hard, visibly moved. "To Mrs. Callahan," Keanu added, "your food saved more than hunger. It gave people a sense of home. And to Mia," he said, locking eyes with her, "you didn't need to say anything that night. Your eyes said enough. And you've been speaking ever since." The crowd looked toward Mia. She gave a small nod, tears quietly brimming. Keanu's voice lowered. This hotel will be written about, maybe even filmed. But the real story isn't about me. It's about every person here who looked around and said, "We can do better." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small bronze plaque. I had this made the day after I left here. He handed it to Gregory, who held it like something sacred. The inscription read, "Everyone welcome, everyone seen, everyone has worth." Gregory read the words aloud and then, without fanfare, walked to the lobby wall beneath the Help Wanted sign. With the help of Walter and Mia, he gently unscrewed the old sign from the wall. Behind it was a clean space, ready and waiting. As he fastened the new plaque into place, the crowd grew silent. Then, from the back of the room, a voice spoke softly. "That's what we needed all along." Another person said, "Amen." And just like that, something shifted, not in the marble or the walls, but in the people. A quiet recognition passed between them. A new beginning had arrived. As the applause swelled, Keanu stepped back, letting the plaque speak for itself. In those few engraved words lived generations of pain, healing, and hope. Mia whispered, "He didn't rebuild the hotel. He rebuilt us." And for the first time, the Sterling Palace truly lived up to its name, shining from within. The change didn't stop at the hotel's front door. Within a week of the grand reopening, the entire block around the Sterling Palace Hotel began to shift. The florist shop owned by Mrs. Delgado, once holding on by a thread, saw a steady stream of customers walking out with fresh bouquets. Tourists who came to see the hotel with the plaque often wandered next door, drawn in by the smell of jasmine and the charm of a woman who now smiled more than she frowned. At Lincoln Elementary, teachers gathered around brand new laptops, donated just a month ago by the mysterious Starlight Foundation. Students now had access to coding software, art programs, and virtual field trips. Test scores began to rise. One fourth-grade teacher, Ms. Patel, posted a thank you video online. It went viral. The caption read, "A hotel changed a city. Here's how." A coffee shop that had been closing early due to low sales began opening its doors again in the evenings. Local musicians played acoustic sets by the window. Couples and friends filled the tables, sipping cappuccinos and laughing under string lights. The energy of the street changed. There was life after dusk again. A few blocks away, a vacant lot that had once been covered in trash had been cleaned and fenced off. Rumor had it that the Starlight Foundation had anonymously funded the transformation. It was now being turned into a community garden. Raised beds were already being installed. Walter's grandkids had volunteered to help build them. He brought his own tools, knee brace and all, showing them how to dig without hurting the soil. At one point, his youngest grandson had paused and looked up at him. "Grandpa," he said, "you're famous now." Walter had chuckled and wiped his hands. "No, son, I'm just finally useful again." Back at the hotel, things continued to evolve. What was once just a luxury destination was now becoming a hub of transformation. The new Arts and Wellness Center buzzed with life. Children painted murals. Young adults practiced elevator pitches for their startup ideas. A former guest who had once stayed in the transitional housing unit came back with a donation of his own. A full scholarship in Mia's name. The hotel lobby had once been polished and sterile. Now it was filled with sound. Piano notes from the community music room, the scent of bread from Mrs. Callahan's classes, and soft conversations from people who no longer walked by with their heads down. And while the world was watching the Sterling Palace, the biggest transformations were the quietest ones, happening in the lives of those who had been invisible until now. Mia's transformation was perhaps the most visible of all. Just 2 years ago, she had been a quiet, cautious young woman, balancing hotel shifts with night classes, often too tired to dream beyond her next exam. But something had shifted the night she saw Keanu standing in the rain. Since then, a quiet determination had grown in her. She kept working her job, but now she also began asking questions about impact, systems, and purpose. One day, she received a letter in the mail. It was thick, sealed with gold foil, and inside it read, "Congratulations, you've been awarded the Silver Light Scholarship for Community Leadership. Fully funded tuition, books, housing, and mentorship included. Sponsored anonymously." Mia knew who it was from. She didn't need a signature. She graduated that spring with a degree in nonprofit management. She walked the stage with her head held high, her mother sobbing from the front row. Her cap was decorated with a quote she'd heard Keanu say that day in the hotel lobby. "We become better when we stop judging and start listening." After graduation, she returned to the Sterling Palace, not as an employee, but as the new director of outreach for the Community Arts and Wellness Center. She now taught weekly classes on entrepreneurship, helping single mothers and young students find their footing in business, just as someone once helped her. Gregory, once the aloof and image-obsessed hotel manager, had undergone his own quiet rebirth. After his public apology, something changed in him. At first, he tried to fade into the background, unsure if redemption was possible after such a public failure. But the staff didn't ostracize him. They included him. Walter invited him to lunch. Mia shared a book on servant leadership. Mrs. Callahan left him a lemon pie with a note, "Still learning is still leading." Months later, Gregory began traveling to other cities to speak at hospitality conferences. He wasn't selling the Sterling brand, he was sharing its story. His most famous keynote was titled, "What One Man Taught Me About the Lobby." In it, he didn't name Keanu directly. Instead, he described him as the man who reminded me that policy without heart is just quiet cruelty. Mrs. Callahan, the once timid kitchen hand, had written a cookbook filled with recipes from the hotel and the stories behind each dish. It was called From the Basement to the Ballroom and became a surprise bestseller. In one interview, she laughed, "I used to slice onions in silence. Now I'm signing books in bookstores I was once afraid to walk into." Walter's story touched hearts far beyond the hotel walls. His quiet dignity, the way he greeted each guest like they mattered, had been captured in a short documentary produced by an independent filmmaker staying at the hotel. The film, The Bellhop's Gift, was nominated for a regional Emmy. Walter didn't care about the awards. What mattered to him was simpler. His grandkids now asked to visit, not out of guilt, out of pride. On a quiet evening, Mia stood outside the hotel, watching the glow of warm lights through the lobby windows. A couple walked by, pausing to read the bronze plaque near the entrance. The man whispered, "I heard this place changed everything." Mia smiled. Behind her, laughter rang from the community kitchen. Down the street, children painted murals on a brick wall. And somewhere, though he'd never asked for credit, Keanu Reeves had lit the first spark. It wasn't just a hotel anymore. It was a movement, one that whispered to the world, kindness doesn't end with a door. It begins there. The day had been long, filled with the usual rhythms of guest check-ins, lobby tours, and gentle background music that now always seemed to carry the subtle lift of something bigger. Mia moved through her shift with a quiet grace. She knew things had changed, not just the hotel, not just the staff, but something within her too. Since the grand reopening, she'd felt like she was finally living a version of herself she could believe in. Yet, as the day drew to a close and the front desk cleared out, she found herself strangely restless. She began tidying the counter, smoothing out the guest log, adjusting the business cards in their little holder. And then, her hand brushed something unfamiliar beneath the desk ledge. Tucked behind the wooden molding, barely visible unless you were looking closely, was a small, sealed envelope. Cream-colored. No postage, no name, just the weight of it. She turned it over in her hands, slowly, heart already pounding before she even opened it. The flap was sealed with a tiny golden star sticker, the same symbol that had quietly threaded itself into so many of the anonymous acts that had changed her life. With a trembling finger, she broke the seal and pulled the letter free. The handwriting was careful, but not formal. Clean lines, a little slanted. No signature, no date, but the words spoke directly to her soul, to the girl who saw but stayed silent, and then chose courage. Thank you. She read it twice, then a third time. Her eyes burned as the gravity of the message sank in. It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. She knew who it was from. She could feel it. She reached into the envelope again and found a small object nestled at the bottom. A golden star pin, the same as the ones on the housekeeper's collars, the same as the one stitched quietly into Walter's new work vest. The same star that had become a quiet symbol of something different, something sacred in their walls now. Mia held it in her hand for a long time before she stood and walked to the staff break room. The mirror above the coffee maker was cracked in one corner, but it was enough. She lifted her blazer and pinned the star just above her heart. She stared at her reflection. For the first time in a long time, she didn't just feel like a worker trying to survive. She felt seen, known, empowered. She stepped outside into the cooling evening air, the lobby doors whispering closed behind her. Across the street, the florist, Mrs. Delgado, was locking up her shop, waving goodnight with fingers stained by lilies and roses. The bakery lights flickered off. The neighborhood had a rhythm now, a pulse of gratitude, of healing. Mia walked a few steps down the sidewalk, then stopped and looked back at the hotel. The light above the entrance cast a soft, golden halo across the brick. She had spent years walking through those doors carrying uncertainty, worry, and a quiet shame for not having spoken up that night. But something had shifted. Ever since the letter, she felt like someone had handed her permission to forgive herself. The star on her blazer caught a glint of the street lamp. She touched it gently. That moment pulled memories to the surface. She remembered standing behind the front desk as Gregory turned Keanu away. She remembered how Keanu had said, "Thank you anyway." Not bitter, not angry, just kind. She'd replayed it for days after, then weeks, the guilt heavy, but the mystery deeper. Who helps people in secret like that? Now she knew, and he had seen her. Not just in that moment by the desk, but in the days after. In the questions she asked, the hesitation in her voice when she tried to connect the dots. And still, instead of calling her out, he'd left her a note that honored the courage it took to change. Inside the lobby, Gregory was laughing with Walter over a spreadsheet of planned community classes. Mrs. Callahan was testing samples in the kitchen. One of the bellhops was showing a group of young interns how to greet guests with confidence. And there, in the middle of it all, Mia could see a new legacy taking shape. This place, once built on status and polished glass, was now built on something invisible but stronger. Dignity, purpose, people. She walked back inside and found her journal, the same one she'd started when she first suspected the Starlight Foundation wasn't just a name on paper. She flipped to the back, where the pages were still blank. She began to write. Tonight, I found a letter beneath the front desk. I think it was always meant to be found. Not when I was searching, but when I was ready to understand it. She continued writing in her journal, the words flowing more freely than they had in months. Keanu didn't sign the note with his name, but he didn't have to. That golden star says everything. It isn't a badge of honor. It's a reminder. A reminder to speak when it matters, to act when silence feels easier, to choose kindness even when the world feels cold. She closed the journal softly and slipped it into her bag, then walked back to the front desk. The envelope and its folded contents lay beside the small golden pin, which now rested against her chest. She placed the note back inside and tucked it into a drawer, locking it gently. Not to hide it, but to protect it. It would stay there, not as a secret, but as a lighthouse. Something future staff could discover when they, too, needed a reminder of what this place stood for. As she stood there, a young girl, one of the new interns, walked up nervously. "Miss Mia, how do you know when you're doing the right thing?" Mia looked at her and smiled, eyes full of emotion. "Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you just feel a little lighter, like you're finally breathing the right air." She glanced down at the star on her lapel and added, "But if it scares you a little and heals someone else a lot, that's usually a good sign." The girl smiled, then walked off, her ponytail swinging as she went to assist a guest. Mia turned back to the desk, the weight in her chest replaced with something clearer, steadier. Think hope. And somewhere, far away or maybe just watching quietly nearby, she felt like Keanu Reeves was smiling too. A full year had passed since Keanu Reeves first walked into the Sterling Palace Hotel and was turned away. But on this day, no one remembered that moment with shame. Instead, they celebrated everything that had grown from it. A gentle breeze drifted through the open front doors as laughter echoed down the newly polished marble halls. The anniversary celebration had begun. Balloons floated above tables where local children colored freely. A band played jazz in the courtyard. Inside the transformed lobby, families mingled with dignitaries and travelers from all over the world. What had once been a place known only for exclusivity had become a beacon of welcome. The lobby itself looked different, not because of expensive decor, but because of the energy. On the far wall, a massive mural had been painted by local artists and volunteers. It showed a pair of outstretched hands forming a bridge between city buildings and gardens, families and strangers. In the center, bold script read, "Kindness is the strongest currency." People paused to take photos in front of it. Some cried when they saw their faces included. Carefully painted into the crowd scenes of the mural, real members of the community immortalized in brushstrokes. It was art that remembered. Gregory, now fully gray and wearing a navy blue blazer with a proud Sterling Palace pin on the lapel, walked around greeting guests like they were old friends. He paused to shake hands with Walter, who now moved with ease, no longer using a cane. Walter's grandkids had flown in from Ohio just for the celebration. Mrs. Callahan stood proudly by a table of desserts, signing copies of her cookbook, now in its third printing. She waved off praise with a smile, saying, "It's Keanu you should be thanking, not me." But everyone knew the truth. This transformation had become a shared legacy. Mia wore her blazer with the golden star pin still fixed just above her heart. She helped guide guests and answered questions from press with grace. Her scholarship had allowed her to finish her degree in nonprofit leadership, and she had recently accepted a new position, Director of Community Development for the hotel. She had also created a new initiative called Starlight Start, providing internships and mentorship for at-risk youth in hospitality, culinary arts, and design. Over 50 young people had already completed the program, but the moment everyone waited for hadn't yet happened. Keanu hadn't arrived. Not yet. Just after sunset, a quiet murmur spread through the crowd gathered in the courtyard. Mia, standing near the registration table, turned toward the entrance instinctively, and there he was. Keanu Reeves walked in. No entourage, no fanfare, just a simple black shirt, dark jeans, and a smile that looked like peace. His hair had grown slightly longer, and he carried no camera, no speech notes, just a small white envelope in his hand. The moment was electric, but no one rushed him. Instead, as if by unspoken agreement, the crowd parted gently, allowing him to move freely. Mrs. Callahan was the first to reach him, wiping her hands on her apron. She cupped his face in her hands and kissed his cheek. "You came back," she whispered. He nodded. "How could I not?" Gregory stepped forward next, holding a glass of sparkling cider and raising it slowly. "To the man who taught us how to see again," he said, voice trembling. "Not just with our eyes, but with our hearts." Cheers erupted around them, not thunderous but warm, like applause at a school recital. Keanu smiled humbly and gave a soft bow of thanks. He approached the mural and stood in silence before it. A hush fell as people gathered behind him, watching his expression. In the center of the painted crowd was a small figure, him. The artist had included his likeness, blending him not as a celebrity, but simply as a man among the people. Next to him, a little girl held a balloon. On the balloon, a star. Keanu traced the air in front of the mural with his finger and then turned to Mia. "You did this," he said gently. She shook her head. "We all did." He handed her the white envelope. "Something for the time capsule." Inside was a photograph. A black and white image of him and his mother from decades ago, standing outside the same hotel in the rain. The caption, handwritten in blue ink, read, "Never forget where change begins." Later that evening, music floated through the courtyard. Children chased bubbles, teenagers passed out cupcakes, and families took turns reading messages from the Wall of Firsts, a new installation where guests pinned notes about milestones they achieved thanks to the hotel's programs. Walter sat at a small table with his grandkids, both of whom now proudly called him their hero. One of them, a boy named Eli, tugged on Keanu's sleeve as he passed. "Are you really the guy from the movies?" the boy asked. Keanu crouched down. "Sometimes, but tonight, I'm just your neighbor." The boy grinned and handed him a drawing, crayon strokes forming a picture of the hotel, with a big sun over it, and stick figures holding hands. "I think you're the guy who made this place warm again," Eli said. Keanu blinked rapidly, then folded the drawing with care and tucked it into his coat pocket. "Then that means it's working." By nightfall, a golden glow poured from the lobby windows as the mural was officially unveiled. Beneath the words, "Kindness is the strongest currency," a new line had been painted in fresh brush strokes. All men arrived in silence. The world answered with love. Mia read the line aloud, voice steady despite the lump in her throat. She turned toward Keanu, who stood quietly beside the crowd, hands in his pockets. "This isn't just your story anymore," she said. "It's ours." Keanu smiled, not the kind meant for cameras or crowds, the kind that belonged to a man who once walked through a storm with his mother, was turned away by the world, and chose to answer that pain with grace. The Sterling Palace Hotel wasn't a palace anymore. It was a place where a single moment of exclusion had become the seed of inclusion, where a man mistaken for less chose to give more, where silence wasn't the end, it was the beginning. And as Keanu stepped outside that night, the new bronze plaque gleamed under the lights. "Everyone welcome, everyone seen, everyone has worth." It wasn't just a hotel motto. It was a new way of living. The morning sun painted the sidewalks in gold as Keanu walked the familiar block, hands tucked into the pockets of his simple navy coat. There was no entourage, no cameras, no need for recognition. The city didn't feel like a city today. It felt like home. The storefronts along the avenue, once shuttered and silent, now buzzed with energy. A new bookstore had opened where a pawn shop used to be, its display window showcasing novels by local authors and children's drawings taped up like masterpieces. The owner, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair, waved as Keanu passed. He smiled and nodded, remembering she was one of the first to attend the hotel's reopening last year. Children laughed nearby. A group played tag around the base of the old oak tree that had once stood in shadow and silence, their sneakers slapped against the pavement, echoing joy into the air. A boy stopped, looked at Keanu, and offered a quick wave before darting back into the game. Further down, Walter sat on a bench with his grandkids, showing them how to fold paper airplanes from hotel stationery. He caught Keanu's eye and gave a proud thumbs up. The man who once mopped the lobby now taught life lessons like patience and kindness in every creased wing. A food cart, manned by Mrs. Callahan's nephew, gave out free soup to anyone who asked. No questions, no judgment. Next to it, a wall mural stretched across the side of the hotel. Bold and vibrant, it read, "Kindness is the strongest currency." Keanu paused in front of the Sterling Palace Hotel, now gleaming with polished brass, sunlit windows, and wide-open doors. It had transformed from a monument to exclusion into a living tribute to second chances. But instead of entering, Keanu turned and strolled toward the far corner of the block. There, the sidewalk narrowed and the street grew quieter. He approached the old tree, the one where he had stood, drenched in rain, turned away, forgotten. Its trunk still bore the scar from a lightning strike decades ago, yet new branches had grown, stronger than before. He stopped beneath it, looking up into the rustling leaves. A soft breeze passed. In the distance, footsteps approached. "Hey, stranger." Keanu turned. Mia stood there, holding 2 coffees, one of which she held out to him. "You always remember," she said softly. He took the cup with a small smile. "It's hard to forget where you came from." They sat on the stone ledge beneath the tree, sipping coffee and watching the city move around them, faster than before, but somehow lighter. "Sometimes I think about that night," Mia said after a pause. "The rain, the silence, the way we all pretended not to see you. I replay it and wonder what I should have done differently." Keanu looked at her, kind but steady. "You spoke up eventually. That's what matters." She nodded. "Still, I was raised better. But that night, I felt like if I said something, I'd lose my job." "You wouldn't have been wrong," Keanu said gently. "Fear has a funny way of disguising itself as silence." Mia turned to him. "Why didn't you say anything when we denied you? Why not confront us then?" Keanu glanced toward the hotel. "Because I've learned that forcing change doesn't work. People have to see themselves clearly first. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is wait." Mia absorbed that. She looked around. The families, the storefronts, the children with backpacks full of donated supplies from the new community fund. "You changed everything," she said. Keanu shook his head slowly. "No, I just reminded people who they were all along. The kindness doesn't need a stage. It needs a spark. And courage. Courage lights it." Silence passed, but it was the kind that comforts, not burdens. The kind that belongs between 2 people who have walked through something hard and come out on the other side, with their eyes open. A young man passed by, pushing a cart filled with flowers. He stopped and handed one to Mia. "Just because." She smiled, thanked him, and tucked the daisy behind her ear. "What do you think would have happened," Mia asked, "if you hadn't come back?" Keanu looked ahead. "The same thing that happens every day. When kindness stays hidden, nothing." She nodded. "And what if more people did what you did?" He turned to her now, eyes steady. "Then the world would stop mistaking silence for weakness, and it would begin to heal." Behind them, laughter echoed again. A girl giggled as her father spun her around. Across the street, a local journalist interviewed Walter beneath the mural. The story was still spreading, not just about Keanu's generosity, but about what the hotel had become. A symbol, not of charity, but of transformation. "There's something I never told you," Mia said, her voice quieter now. "After that first night, I wanted to quit. I went home, cried on my bathroom floor, ashamed. But then I saw you again, the night you donated the supplies anonymously, and I thought, maybe the world still has people who give without needing applause." Keanu's eyes softened. "I think the world is full of them. They're just usually too quiet to be seen." Mia looked down at the daisy in her hand. "Not anymore." The wind rustled gently through the tree branches above them. Keanu stood and dusted off his jeans. Mia followed, still holding the daisy. As they walked back toward the hotel, a boy about 10 years old waved at them from the front steps. His mom stood behind him, holding a grocery bag with the hotel's new food voucher logo on it. The boy ran up and handed Keanu a thank you card, hand-drawn with a crayon sketch of the hotel and the words, "You made my mom smile again." Keanu knelt to meet the boy's eyes. That means the world. As they watched him run back inside, Mia asked softly, "What now?" Keanu looked up at the building, its new sign glowing warm gold, its lobby filled with chatter and compassion. "Now we keep going. Every day, quietly if we must, but always forward." He paused at the sidewalk's edge, beneath the old tree where it had all started. "When you respond to cruelty with grace," he said, more to the air than anyone else, "the world doesn't just notice, it changes." The screen fades to black. Voiceover. Have you ever been judged unfairly? What would happen if we all responded with kindness instead of anger? Let us know in the comments. And if this story moved you, share it. Someone out there might need that reminder today. Because kindness, when shared, doesn't fade. It multiplies. Thank you for watching this incredible story. See you in the next one.